In today's video, we are going to be looking at 10 different saucy little effects that you can do in After Effects to spice up your work just a little bit. All of these I use quite often in my work for various things. They just all look super cool and it's easy to spice it up a little bit. But without further ado, let's hop straight into After Effects, where I have 10 different compositions set up, one for each effect. And they're all 1920 by 1080 at 24 frames per second. Just keeps it nice and simple. This first one is a little bit of a gloss type of look, which I love to use, especially in more modern cases or like UI instances. All we're going to do is take our shape layer, just up here. You can pick any shape you want. In this case, I'm just going to use a square, and then you want to click on the fill, and you want to make sure that you have a gradient wrap selected, and then we're just going to open this up, and we actually want to make sure that we fill this all the way up, and the same with the bottom. And you can change the colors to be whatever. I'm just going to go from a white to a black color, and we're just going to draw this out right here. And then if I hit V, it brings up these little gradient markers, and I'm just going to do a top to bottom here. And then I'm gonna make sure that my shape is centered. Now, on the layer, I'm gonna right click and go to layer styles, and then I'm gonna add a bevel and emboss. If I go into my rectangle and go into the gradient fill and just click on that, I'm just gonna reverse this actually, just to make it a little bit easier for us to see. Now you can see the little bit of a white hair at the top, and that is gonna be our main thing. It's just gonna give us just a little bit of pop. So if I go into my bevel and emboss, I'm gonna set the highlight mode to normal, and then I'm gonna set the opacity to 100% just so it's a little bit easier to see. And then you can play around with the different types of bevels and embosses and all that good stuff. We are just gonna set it to an inner bevel. That'll just give us this nice little look here. And you can go to a chisel hard if you want a different look. And then you can play around with the angle and the direction to get it exactly where you want. So in my case, I want it to come from above. So by setting that to 90, you can see it comes from straight above. You can play with the altitude as well to see like the depth of it. We're just gonna leave it right here. I think 62 looks pretty good. And let's have a look at that. So now you can see we've got this nice little edge up here, which is just gonna give us, again, that little bit of depth. Now we can take this and we can go into blending options and then go into advanced blending and take the fill opacity all the way down to 0. And that's just gonna leave us with just this little edge here, and then of course the shadow as well. Now, I'm not too big of a fan of the shadow there, so I'm just gonna decrease it a good bit until it's barely noticeable. Now we can duplicate this layer, and I'm just gonna position it below. And this time we'll actually remove the layer style and just keep the gradient. And we're gonna click on it, and then you can pick whatever colors you want. But what I wanna do is click on the opacity for the white color and just decrease it a good bit, maybe something like 10%. And then I wanna make sure that the black is also decreased a good bit, just like that. And then if I just flip it around by taking the light to the top and the dark to the bottom, we get something that looks pretty sweet. And this is the base of our little UI window. So we get the nice gradient and we get the little highlight on top, which just gives it just a little bit of extra flair. But we still need the gloss effect of something being kind of blurred out, which is what really sells this effect. So we are gonna take the shape layer and we're gonna duplicate it again, and we're gonna place this just below everything, and we can rename this to keep it nice and easy for us. We can rename this blur map, and we are gonna turn it on to just a regular fill, so just a solid color, and then set it to black or white. It's not too important. But then we can hide that, and now we are gonna hit Shift-Command-Y to create an adjustment layer, and then we're gonna add the effect Camera Lens Blur. If I then select the layer in here, and then select the blur map, and then go to Effects and Mask, and then increase the blur a whole bunch, and then hit Invert, you can see that everything is gonna be blurred. And that's because the blur map doesn't have a background, it's just one solid color. So what we can add to that is a solid composite, and let's just decrease the blur amount a little bit to something like 10. And then if we hide that now, since we have the white background, you can see everything that is white is not gonna be blurred, and everything that is black is gonna be blurred. Again, you can invert it, so it just depends on what you kind of want and the colors you use, but either one works as long as you have black and white values. And that's pretty much all there is to creating this nice little blurry gloss look. And you can adjust the gradient to get whatever look you want. You can add some colors to it, some spice, but that's just keeping it nice and simple. Let's hop into the second effect, which is gonna be a nice little grainy effect type thing that just looks super cool. And it's super easy to do, and you can add it in so many different use cases. Again, we just have our circle here, and we wanna add a little bit of a grain noise kind of shadow here where it has a shadow already. There's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can use it with a shape layer, where you just add the shape layer and use it as a track matte. Or what you can also do is, if you have a shape here with a gradient where it goes from black to white or just a light to a dark color, you can actually duplicate it, and then we are going to add an effect called extract. And then if I solo this layer, and I'm just gonna drag the highlights down and then feather it out just a little bit and drag it in a little bit more, just until we get kind of what we're going for here. And then we are gonna add roughen edges, and this is the driver of this. We are gonna increase the complexity to 10. We are gonna set the scale down very low, and you can already see the little noise kind of look we get down here, and you increase the edge sharpness to get a look that you're going for. And then if I show it again, we should have something where we can change the hue and saturation a little bit, and then just take the lightness down a little bit. You can see we now have a nice little shadow area here with some nice texture in it, which just adds a little bit of extra oomph, kind of like a Ben Marriott type of style. Another way you could do this is by using a simple shape layer. So if you hit G to pick your pen tool, and then make sure you have a fill on, you can just kind of rough around, get a rough little shape here, drag around, and then you can use this as a track mat, or the original shape as a track mat for this, so that, you know, it doesn't spill everywhere. You can take that same roughen edges by just copying and pasting it on there, and then you want to make sure you add a false box blur and drag it before the roughen edges. And then if you increase that, you'll get the same look. So really just two different ways of getting the same look. But that said, let's go on to number 3. And this one is an effect I use all the time. It's super sick in selling transitions and just adding an extra layer of movement to your animations without actually doing too much. And this is kind of like a focused breathing, so taking inspiration from real world cameras. If I add an adjustment layer, and this is super simple, ridiculously simple, I'm gonna add a false box blur, and I'm just gonna go right to the middle and then set my iterations to 6. I just like using 6 because it's a nice quality, and then I'm gonna set the blur radius to 6 as well. And I'm gonna keyframe the blur radius, and I'm gonna go a couple frames back. 3, 4 doesn't really matter too much, but not too long, not too short. Set it to 0, and then go forward a couple more frames, maybe a little bit longer on the back end of it, and then set it to 0 as well. So now if you look at these keyframes, they look something like this, and I rarely ever ease them. I just have linear keyframes, and then playing it back, you just get a little bit of focused breathing here that just looks super cool. And you can even add a little bit more to it. So maybe add right before it, you'll do maybe a little quick one. So 3 and a 0. So you just get just a little bit of anticipation before it really happens, the transition. And it's just a super easy way to sell a transition and kind of move it around a little bit. I typically use it with a little bit of transform and shake and all that stuff. So that would kind of look like adding another adjustment layer. And then let's add a transform effect. And let's keyframe the scale. Again, hit U to show the scale. And then let's go forward a little bit and then scale this up. And then we can take these keyframes and just add some ease to them by hitting F9. And let's just center this up a little bit so it's the fastest right in the middle, like that. And then playing that back, we now have just a little bit of extra movement to it. Just helps sell it a little bit. You can even go the extra step and let's add some slider controls. We'll just duplicate that twice so we have it. And then alt click the position in your transform property. And then let's add a wiggle, and then you will pick whip the first slider control, and then comma, very important, and then pick whip the second slider control, and that'll just let you keyframe it. So right here at the beginning, keyframe both of them, go right to where the transition happens, and let's set it to something like 5 by 5, and then go forward and then set it to 0 by 0 again. And that's just gonna animate a little bit of a camera shake. You can see here, just gives it a little bit of extra oomph. And what I found is if you hit U to show the keyframes, just move them up a little bit just to slightly delay it a little bit. It usually works just a little bit better in my opinion. But that's just super easy way of adding some extra movement to your animations and transitioning between scenes in a super simple and quick way that looks super good. Now the fourth one is an effect I use a good bit as well. It is using the light sweep to create a little bit of like a halo glow type of thing. Just looks super cool. But I've set up this little scene. It's just a circle shape layer, a background, and then a stars layer with just CC Starburst and Deep Glow. All we're gonna do here is duplicate our shape layer, and then we're gonna add the light sweep just like that. And now we get this nice little look, and we're gonna set that to 0. And then we are gonna increase the width a good bit, just so we get a nice little, you know, some nice coverage here. And then we are gonna set the sweep intensity to 0 because we don't need any of that. And we're gonna change the light reception to cutout. So what that means is essentially you just get the highlight glow, which is why we do it on a separate layer, because then we can add glow to it and only glow the highlight that we want. And then it's as simple as adding deep glow and then you have a nice little glowing edge. And you can play around with it, you can change it, super easy. I like doing it pretty tight, so like maybe like a 2, maybe decrease the width a little bit here, and decrease the intensity to something like 10, 40, just a nice little glow here. You can even change the color of it a little bit, maybe lighten it up a little bit, just to give it a little bit of color in there. But just an easy way to get a nice clean little halo glow. And you can do this with text as well. If you had some shapes, you can add it to that as well. So just kind of building on top of that. But this technique, you can use it for pretty much anything. The next one is a shape repeater. And this is a great way to add a little bit of detail to backgrounds and whatnot. I've set up a star just so we can see it. And I'm actually just gonna place it in the top left corner. And then I'm gonna open up my star layer here and add a repeater. Once I've added a repeater, you'll see it'll make a bunch of copies, and if I just increase that to cover the whole screen, it'll make it a little bit easier for us. Now we are gonna click on the polystar again and then add another repeater because we also want it to go down. We don't only want one row of it. And again, this time we are gonna open that repeater and go to transform, and then we are gonna set the position to 0 by 100, and that'll then take it down instead of sideways. And then we can increase the amount of copies until it covers the whole screen. Now you can do some pretty funky stuff with this, and playing around with the scale of it and all that stuff, you can see you can get some pretty interesting results, twist them around and all that sort of stuff. And it's really just about messing around and finding a really cool look. But one thing I've seen that works very well, or I've done before, is if you take the polystar and just change it to a polygon, and let's just increase that until we get a circle, and maybe decrease the size of this a little bit as well, just so it's not super big. So let's just decrease that a good bit. Now, if I hide this background shape here, and then I'm actually gonna change the color of this to a black color or white, doesn't really matter. And then we are gonna add a background shape or a background solid and change that to black. And then just so we have a black and white little thing to work with. And then we're gonna add another ellipse right in the middle here. And let's just center that bad boy up. And let's add some turbulent displace to it just to make it nice and funky shape. Increase that a whole bit till we get something that looks pretty good. And you can play around with the evolution if you want. I'm just gonna alt click, and then we're just gonna do time times 100. And that's just gonna dance it around a little bit. And then I'm gonna hit P on it to bring up the position, and alt click, and then I'm gonna add a wiggle expression. Let's do 1,300. That's just gonna send it all around the screen for us. Now, what we're gonna do here is actually pre-comp these 3 layers. So I'm gonna hit Shift Command C, and then I'm just gonna name this shape blob. In this, I'm gonna add an adjustment layer, and I'm gonna add fast box blur, and set the iterations to 6 again, just to up the quality a little bit. Increase it just a little bit here, and you can see this start smearing into one another. And then we are gonna add a levels to this, and then we're gonna bring this down until we get a nice little shape that's blobbed up, and increase that, and that looks pretty good. And now we get this shape that kind of goes and messes around with the other shapes and kind of sticks to them a little bit. And you can play around with this. You can increase the blur until you get a look that kind of looks really good. Depends on how thick and blobby you want it. You can play around with it pretty good. You can even go ahead and maybe increase the shape size of this a little bit, just to make it a little bit more interesting. Maybe move it down here, duplicate one, and maybe make a smaller one up here in the corner. That'll go around here, just so we have some nice little shapes to work with it. Back in our layer, we can then go in and add an extract effect, just like before, and we can remove all the blacks around it. And you can always add a fill effect to change the color of it, turn it into whatever color you want, maybe like a dark little background here. But that's a pretty cool shape that you can work with, create some pretty interesting looks with this little effect. Super cool way to add a little bit of more spice to your backgrounds as well, and just make it look a little bit more grungy in a sense. Works really well in those type of scenarios. The next one is connected dots. This one is really fun if you're working with a lot of, it's often useful to be able to create a little grid of dots. What we're gonna do here is hit G to bring up our pen tool, and then we're gonna remove the fill, and we're gonna add a stroke. I'm just gonna make this black so we can see it. Now we're gonna add however many points we want, and this is important because we wanna think about how many dots we want, because we want each point to go to a dot. So in this case, I'm gonna click 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. And that's plenty good, and then we can increase the width of that a little bit, and maybe go into contents, go into shape, go into stroke, and then change the line cap to a round cap and the meter join to a round join. So it'll just round those corners a little bit. Now, if we open the path and click on the path, so we have that selected, we can go into window, scroll all the way down and create nulls from paths. And then we want to do a points follow nulls, and that'll just mean that whenever we move a null, it'll essentially move that point that it's connected to. So as you see here, I move this one and it kind of moves around. So that lets us create some pretty fun stuff. If I select all my nulls and then I'll go to align layers and composition and just center that up. If you don't see this panel, it'll be up in window and align to get that bad boy showing up. Now I'm gonna hit P on one of them and I'm gonna add an expression, and it's the same one we've used a couple times already, wiggle expression, and then we're just gonna do 0.5, 150, and that'll just give it just a little bit of movement. And now it's all about, we just wanna move them around a little bit, and you can just right click on this, copy expression only, paste it onto all the layers, and then we can just move these around a little bit. That is pretty good. Now, how do we get dots to connect to this? Well, it's actually pretty easy. So we're gonna click our ellipse tool, and we're gonna remove the stroke, whatever you want, doesn't really matter, and pick a color. Let's do red, and I'm just gonna hold shift and drag while creating this little shape. And then I'm just gonna center it up, and I wanna make sure that my anchor point is in the middle of the shape. Now, this is pretty easy. So we have 8 little layers here, and I'm just gonna duplicate this until we have 8 shapes as well, just like that. And then I'm gonna hit P on all of these to bring up the position of them. And then we wanna link the position to position of each of these. And so it's pretty simple. I'm just gonna take one and link it. And then we're gonna take the second one and link it to that. And just like that, we have a connected dot grid that's kind of like a networking type thing. Super easy to make and super easy to work with, and you can easily change the path of this. So that makes it extra fun to work with, and you can do some pretty fun things with this effect. The next effect is a little bit of a different one. It's an essential graphics effect, and I recently discovered this one, and it was super helpful in speeding up my workflow, especially when you are trying to create templates or work with a graphic where you might need to change pictures often, or text for that matter. So we're gonna start with this placeholder, and we're actually gonna pre-comp the placeholder. And we are gonna move all attributes into a new composition, and we'll just name this picture pre. And then if I go double click on that, and I'm gonna go into Essential Graphics, and then I'm gonna select this composition that we just made. And then all I'm gonna do is drag this into my Essential Panels folder here. Once we've dragged this into the Essential Graphics panel, we can go back into our little panel in here, and then with the layer selected, if you open it up, you can see we now have this essential properties. So I can scale this down, place it wherever I want to, and then I can drag any picture I want into this essential properties. This makes it super easy to change pictures quickly. Now I've got this random photo here, and I'm just gonna drag it right into here, and just like that, it changes it. It's just a super cool way to make it a little bit easier to customize. The good thing about this is you can drag in this pre-comp as many times as you want to. So if you drag it in again, it'll show up with the actual picture itself, and you can change it again. So you can keep using different images over and over and over again. It just comes in handy sometimes being able to be a little bit more efficient in your workflow. The 8th effect is a super clean way of just adding a little bit of spice to it and a little bit of texture as well. So let's say we have this nice little text here and we want to reveal it in a cool way. Well, one way that I might do it would be to use kind of a brush stroke type thing. And we can actually make that super easily within After Effects without having to do too much work. All it requires is selecting a pen tool by hitting G or clicking up here, remove the fill from it, and then add a stroke and make it a color you can easily see. It doesn't really matter too much because we're not actually going to see the stroke itself. But let's click and then drag to cover the text, and then increase the stroke width until it covers the whole text. And we're gonna add a roughen edges to this. As you might be able to tell from this video, roughen edges is super powerful and perhaps a little underused. But what we're gonna do here is we're gonna increase the scale just a little bit, or decrease it, sorry. And then we're gonna stretch it a good bit like that, and then increase the border a good bit as well, and increase the complexity a little bit. And you can see here, we start to get some nice brush looking texture type thing. And you can just kind of play around with this until you get a look that you kind of want. And this is all about just playing around and getting a nice stroke. So this right here looks pretty good. 108.5, 88, 4.6, 9. This looks like a real brush stroke. Now in our shape layer, we're just gonna add a trim paths. Once again, super useful effect just to do a bunch of stuff with, but set the end to 0 and at the very beginning, and then go forward about 12 frames, set it to 100, and then you can just add a little bit of sexy speed to it, maybe, you know, please, not bad. And then we are gonna select our text layer and pick whip the track map to it, and that'll give us a nice little text reveal. This might be a little bit fast, you don't really get to see the texture, but if you go here, you can see we just get a little bit of that juicy texture in there. And a fun thing you can do with this as well, if we show it again, you can go in and you can keyframe the evolution as well, or add an expression to the random seed, maybe something like a posterized time 6, and then a random 1000, and that'll just change it up just a little bit, just to get a little bit more movement in there, and then playing that back and just get a little bit of extra spice in there. I mean, cheat code, look at how sexy that is. You can't help the sauce here, just dripping everywhere. The 9th one is something I saw recently on Twitter, and that's super cool. We all know that you can, well, hopefully we all know that you can orient things along a path. So if you take a style tool and just shape that up and remove the stroke, add a fill to it, let's just make it red, hit G to bring up your little pen tool, and then change the fill to nothing, and then a stroke. Let's just make this a blue color, and then we're just gonna do a little path here, nice and easy, decrease that width a good bit. And then all we're gonna do here is open up the path for this. So go into your shape path, and then you're gonna Command C the path from this. And then on your star, you're gonna hit Command V, and that'll just bring it out animated along the path. Now you can see here that the point stays upwards the whole time, but if we right click on our layer, go to transform and auto orient, and then orient along path, you can see that it'll turn with the path, so that the point always follows kind of the edge of the path. This is pretty cool and super useful in a bunch of different ways, but you can do something a little bit different. If I delete these two layers, and then I will right click to add a new layer, and this one is gonna be a camera layer. And we're gonna add a little bit of text, and I'm just gonna type something completely random, but please do feel free to like and subscribe. And let's just change the text to something that is pretty sexy, like a Helvetica Norway, and scale that bad boy down a little bit. Now we have this text, we're gonna turn it 3D to really spice this up. And now if I hit rotation, you can rotate it whichever way you want. This looks kind of flat, boring. If you then right click on the layer, go to transform, auto orient, and then go to auto orient towards camera, and then also pick orient each character independently, and then boom. Now each of the letters, they turn towards the camera, so they always face the camera. You can get some pretty cool stuff with this, like a whole tunnel of letters that you just move through, you get what I'm saying? Last but not least, we have a distorted text animation, and this one you've probably seen before, but it's a nice little text animation. We have this text set up, and it's very important to keep the font in mind, because it's going to be a lot easier if you use something like this font that has very few points, a lot of straight lines. Dharma Gothic in this case. We're going to duplicate this, and we are going to select a light one as well. So thin, bada bing, bada boom. We are going to right click on this layer. We're going to go to create shapes from text. We're going to go to the other one, create shapes from text. Now we can hide that second one, and I'm going to go forward to about, let's say, 2.5 seconds. Open up my contents here. I'm just going to search for path here to make it a little bit easier on us and save some time. Keyframe the path for all of these. Then we're gonna go back to, let's say, 1.5 seconds. And then on this layer, we're also gonna search for path. And we are gonna Command C the L, and then we're gonna paste it on to the L. So that'll set a keyframe there. And I for the I, and the K for the K, and the E for the E. So they match up. So now we get this little animation here. Super simple, easy to reverse as well. Command C, Command V, boom. So now we have this little, goes out, and then it goes in. Select all of them, add some sexy speed, and whap-pow, we get a nice little animation. Super trendy, get you 1,000 likes on Instagram pretty quick. This is a little bit stale though, so we're gonna add a little bit of spice to it. To spice it up a little bit, what can we do? We can add a solid. We're just gonna name this displacement map. Boom, and we're gonna add fractal noise, just something super sexy, increase the contrast a little bit, something wacky. And then we can add a displacement map to this, and let's select our displacement map, and then effects and mask, and now we just get a little bit of that initial, might even set it to something like 2x2, just super simple. Next step, add an adjustment layer, and for this one, we are just gonna add duplicate this one, and then we're just gonna hide this, and add a gradient ramp to this, And let's set it from side to side just to make it a little bit cool. Drag it above, and then enable the fractal noise, and then change the blending mode to something like multiply so that you still get a little bit of that texture, but still the gradient from light to dark. All right, we're gonna take this and we're gonna pre-comp this bad boy and just name this something like time this pre, and we can hide both of these displacement maps because we don't need them. And then to the adjustment layer, we're gonna add a time displacement effect, and we're gonna change it to the time displacement pre that we just made. Effects and mask doesn't really matter in this instance. Set the time displacement on like 0.2, and then the higher you increase this time resolution, the more laggy it's gonna be. You can set it to something like 24 for this case, because that's the length of our composition here. We get a nice little effect here with some nice texture in there. Just looks super cool. The fun thing about this is if you go into this, you can change kind of the look of it to be whatever you want. So let's say you want the complexity down a little bit to be a little bit softer, and maybe increase the size of it a little bit more, just for a little bit of a different look. Maybe change it to something like swirly. You just get a very different look. So now here you can see it just looks a little bit different in the way that it distorts it, but the technique is the same pretty much. And that's just a nice little effect you can do with text and time displacement. Just looks cool. But that is pretty much it for this tutorial. 10 different little effects, animations that you can do that are all super easy and super clean and will spice up your work infinitely. You can get the project file for this on Patreon at patreon.com/Mapal, as well as some other stuff, other project files and whatnot. But hopefully you learned something new. Hopefully you feel inspired to go and create your own things. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I just want to say thank you, and I'll see you again next week.